Hello everyone and welcome to The Good Old Gamer. So over the past few months we've been taking a look at a bunch of different CPUs and platforms to figure out which one is offering the absolute maximum performance at the best possible price point. So today we're going to continue that by taking a look at the Intel Core i5-10600K. So in the last video we took a look at the Ryzen 5 5600, which right now you can get between $150 and about $170 on the regular. And this CPU right here fits right in that price category around the Ryzen 5 5600 and the i5 12400. So with Z490 motherboards now coming in well below $100, I'm like, hey, let's see how the old SKYLAKE architecture compares to the newer CPUs. And if you're already running one of these, is it worth an upgrade? And if you're looking to buy or build a new system, is this still worth the money? So that's what we're going to be answering here today. But first, so today's video is sponsored by the AliExpress Summer Clearance Event. This is going on between July 18th and through July 22nd. They're offering discounts on a wide array of stuff up to 70% off. So taking a quick look here at the deals that'll be coming up. These are some of their showcase deals on their front page. You can see everything from smartwatches all the way through VR headsets and a bunch of different items. I mean, it's AliExpress. It's basically like Amazon. So if there's anything out there, little gizmos, gadgets, anything you've been looking for, you should probably check this out as they're offering some insane value and some extra promo codes down in the description below. And to highlight one of the great deals that they have going on, AliExpress has sent over an 8BitDo Pro wireless controller. Now, I've for a very long time have been wanting to mess around with one of these guys. And I was like, yeah, this is definitely something I think you guys, my audience, would be interested in, as obviously I like to play a lot of retro games, and I know a lot of you guys do as well. Now, what's interesting is, to me, this feels a lot like a PlayStation 4 controller. Obviously, I haven't really messed with it yet, which I will be doing with you guys here in a minute, but this is a very sturdy controller. Coming over here to the back, it has a rechargeable battery already inside of it, much like a PlayStation 4 controller. Now, these are interesting. I just noticed it when I picked it up. We do have extra buttons here at the back, so if you're into competitive gaming, this might make for a great controller for that if you play with a controller versus a keyboard and mouse. Taking a look around the controller, we also have the triggers up top here. Like I said, feels very similar to a PlayStation 4 controller to me. And then we have our shoulder buttons. This is a USB-C charger, which we'll check out the accessories here in a sec. We have some additional buttons down here, which I am unfamiliar with, but I will go ahead and check those out. Start and select. I do like the old school Nintendo style start and select options. We have an old school Nintendo or PlayStation type style D-pad here, and the buttons feel very, very responsive. Just basically what you'd expect from a high quality first party controller from something like Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. Looks like it's already searching for some Bluetooth right now, but obviously I don't have this hooked up yet. Taking a look at some of the other accessories, you have the manual, which I don't think many of you guys will need. This is actually kind of cool. I noticed that it comes with a little pin. So if you're into some retro swag, comes with that. So that's pretty neat. And then I'm assuming this is the USB cable. So there we go. We have a USB-C data and obviously charging cable as well, which comes in handy as there's more and more USB-C devices out there. So I always like getting my hands on more of these cables. I only have a few on hand right now. Jumping on over to their website, it's already discounted, but this is going to be a part of the deal, which will be kicking off on July 18th, which we're not there yet. Obviously, I'm recording this beforehand. So expect some crazy deals on this. And if you're interested in picking one of these guys up, links are down in the video description. Make sure you check it out. So I thought that this would be a great item. They gave me a few different options. I figured this one you guys would really like. I'm sure many of you guys have already used 8BitDo controllers before, but if you want another one, or if you haven't tested one out like myself, this is definitely gonna be a great time to get one. And as an added bonus, yes, there's a lot of added bonuses going on. They're throwing everything at this particular campaign, so take advantage of these deals. So as a new user, if you've never used AliExpress before, they're gonna give you the option to buy something. They're gonna have a list of stuff I'm showing you guys right here. You can go through, pick, and I'm sure there's probably gonna be more when it's time, but you can go ahead and get them for 1 penny. So that's kind of like a thank you for joining, so you can get something else that you may need. Want more RGB? Get it for a penny. hey, there you go. More RGB over here. Maybe some lewd stickers. Whatever it is that floats your boat. Baby Yoda. That's just kind of like a free gift to thank you guys for checking them out. So I would definitely take advantage of this if you're interested in anything over there. So yeah, this is your opportunity. Save up to 70%. Remember, that's July 18th through July 22nd. So all the way through, right at that midnight mark over there. So make sure you don't miss it. It's coming up tomorrow after this video goes live, so you can go ahead and check those out. Remember, links down below. Take advantage of that situation. Alrighty, guys, now let's get back to the video. All right, so before we get into the video, I want to go over some of the settings. Now, all the information is in the video description down below if you want more detailed information. But real quick, I got the i5 10600K. I'm running it at 4.8 gigahertz. Now, this CPU can go higher if you use a more expensive cooler. I decided to use the exact same cooler that I did on the 12400 and on the Ryzen 5600, which is the Deepcool GAMMAXX 400. It's a $15 120 millimeter tower cooler. It's a great value. I absolutely recommend anybody pick it up if you're looking for the best performance per dollar on a cooler. So I couldn't push it too much higher than that, but in reality, these can go up to about 5 gigahertz. So we're not too far off. The ring clock coming in at 4.8 gigahertz as well. And then using the Samsung B die, I had that timed in at 3800 C14, so 1428, and that came in at about 40 nanoseconds. So, and of course, to remove the GPU bottleneck, because we want to see how fast these CPUs really are one-to-one next to each other, I'm using my buddy Austin's RTX 3090, and this is at 1080p high with scaled down resolution to make sure that we were not GPU bound. So, alrighty guys, now it's time to jump into those benchmarks. Alright, so kicking things off with Borderlands 3, once again, 1080p high, 50% scale. We can see here the stock 10600K comes in at 132 FPS on average and 90 on the 1% low. That jumps up to 156 FPS on average and 111 on the 1% low when fully tuned. So once again, we're seeing a nice little bump when you overclock and tune your RAM. And I'm going to directly compare the 10600K with the Ryzen 5 5600, as those were competitors way back when, and I want to see how they're doing here today. So the stock 5600 comes way ahead at 165 FPS on average and 105 on the 1% low. So going from 90 all the way to 105. So that's a pretty big jump there. And then when overclocked, the Zen 3 CPU comes in at 192 FPS on average versus 158, and then 127 versus 111. So in this particular title, the Zen 3 architecture is definitely superior. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077. We have the 10600K at stock coming in at 125 FPS on average, 75 on the 1% low, and that goes up to 155 FPS on average and 106 on the 1% low, another massive gain there with the tuned and overclock system. So compared to the 5600, that's 135 and 84, and then we have 168 and 111 on the overclock. So we have basically a tie on the overclock, so 106 to 111. The 5600 is a little bit ahead, but not by much. However, at stock, it is significantly ahead in this title as well. Next up is Far Cry 5. The 10600K at stock comes at 141 FPS on average, 100 on the 1% low, and then 169 FPS on average and 118 on the 1% low when tuned and overclocked. That's compared to 151 and 108 on the 5600, so a little bit ahead at stock, but only by 8%. I love simple math. And then we have 182 and 132 on the 1% low, so that's coming in a good bit ahead of the 10600K in this particular test. So we're starting to see a trend here now, aren't we? Next game is Gears 5, and we have for the 10600K coming in at 151 FPS on average, 121 on the 1% low for stock performance, and that goes up to 169 FPS on average and 136 on the 1% low when overclocked. Now, compared to the 5600, we're just going to focus on the 1% lows. At stock, that comes in at 128 versus 121. Not a big difference there, so similar, but it's still ahead and a win for the AMD chip. And then when overclocked, we have 154 versus 136. So this is a pretty significant advantage for the AMD chip when tuned and overclocked. Next up is Halo Infinite, and we see the script flipped on this one as we did in the previous video when we looked at Alder Lake versus Zen 3. This particular game and game engine just likes Intel. So if this is a big game for you, Intel is probably going to be the way to go. So anyway, we have the stock 10600K coming in at 178 FPS on average and 121 on the 1% low, compared to 228 FPS on average when overclocked and 157 on the 1% low. That's compared to 100 FPS on the 1% low for the stock 5600, so that's a massive gain, stock versus stock, and then 125 versus 157. So this game, it basically completely reverses the script here. However, getting back on script with Horizon Zero Dawn, we have the 10600K coming in at 169 FPS on average and 124 on the 1% low. When tuned and overclocked, that goes up to 186 FPS on average and 136 on the 1% low. So compared to the 5600 at stock, that comes in with a 1% low of 133, so versus 124. So that's a nice bump for the AMD chip. And then we have 152 on the overclocked Zen 3 chip compared to 136. So once again, Zen 3 pulls ahead on this particular title. Now, Starcraft 2, the game that Zen 3 absolutely loves, the fact that the 10600K does not win here is not a surprise. But it still puts up decent numbers. As we can see here, the 10600K at stock comes in at 248 FPS on average and 171 on the 1% low. That goes up to 278 FPS on average and 197 on the 1% low when tuned and overclocked. Now, the 5600, I'm chuckling because nothing can beat this in this game. Not yet, anyway. At stock, that comes in at 213 FPS on average on the 1% low in comparison to 171. So a massive win for AMD on that one. And then we have the 5600 coming in at 241 FPS on average in comparison to 197 when tuned and overclocked. Next, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The stock 10600K comes in at 153 FPS on average, 100 on the 1% low, and then 178 FPS on average when tuned and overclocked, and 119 on the 1% low. The stock 5600 comes in at 98 FPS on the 1% low, actually losing to the 10600K in this particular title, and then takes the lead a little bit when overclocked at 126 FPS on the 1% low compared to 119. So in this particular game, I'd say they're much of a muchness here, but the Zen 3 chip does have that little bit of an advantage. Next game is Watchdogs Legion. We have the stock 10600K coming in at 98 FPS on average and 77 on the 1% low. That gets bumped up to 122 FPS on average and 91 on the 1% low when tuned and overclocked. This is in comparison to 79 FPS on the 1% low for the stock 5600, basically tying the stock 10600K. And then when tuned and overclocked, that comes in at 103 FPS on average on the 1% lows. And that is way ahead of the 91 on the overclocked 10600K. So another win for Zen 3 when tuned and overclocked. And finally, our last PC game is Witcher 3. We did 720p high, so we didn't have a GPU bottleneck. So now we have the 10600K at stock coming in at 154 FPS on average and 111 on the 1% low. And then we have 192 FPS and 138 on the 1% low when tuned and overclocked. This is in comparison to the 5600's 1% low at stock at 122. So that's 11 FPS higher than the stock baseline 10600K and 155 when tuned and overclocked versus 138. So another decent win for the Zen 3 CPU. Now, time to flip on over to what I'm most interested in here recently, and that is emulation. So we're going to start with CEMU using Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is at 720p, which is the game's native res, with a 240 FPS cap. None of these CPUs are getting anywhere near there, so no real worries, but just wanted the overhead just in case. So the stock 10600K comes in at 103 FPS on average, 83 on the 1% low, and then when you tune and overclock, this gets you up to 110 FPS on average and 89 on the 1% low. So much like the other CPUs that we're seeing, there's not a whole lot in the memory tuning for these emulators. It doesn't seem to matter on the RAM latency with these. It's mostly just the frequencies going up and a little bit from the tuning. So there's just not a lot extra when overclocking. The Ryzen CPU does see a bigger advantage, but that's because even at stock, it does have higher memory latency than any of the Intel CPUs. But anyways, the stock 5600 comes in at 85 FPS on the 1% low at stock, coming in just slightly ahead of the 10600K. And then when tuned and overclocked, that comes in at 95 FPS on average, overtaking the overclocked 10600K's 89 by a decent margin. And then finally, we have RPCS 3 using Resistance Fall of Man as our test. Once again, 720p with a 240 FPS cap. So the stock 10600K comes in with 80 FPS on average, and then 41 on the 1% low. As I mentioned in the previous video, this is a very difficult sequence as the 1% lows are going to be much, much lower than the average, and that's the reason why I chose this for the testing. Anyways, going with the overclock system that gets you up to 91 FPS on average and 50 on the 1% low. So that's actually a pretty good gain there in this particular title. So taking a look at the Zen 3 CPUs, we have 41 FPS on the 1% low at stock, matching the 10600K in RPCS 3. And then when tuned in overclock, that comes in at 48 FPS in comparison to 50. So effectively margin of error in this particular test. Alrighty, so if we go ahead and take a look at the 12 game average, we can go ahead and see the 1% low average over the course of the games at stock for the 10600K comes in at 101 FPS on average. So still very good for high refresh gaming. And if we compare this to the 5600, it's a little bit behind, but not by much, which comes in at 108 FPS on the 1% low on average. So about 7%, simple math. Now here's where the gap kind of comes in. We have 121 FPS on average for the tuned and overclocked 10600K, and that's in comparison to 131 of the 5600. So that's a big enough gap there that you may notice. And this is going to get you well above that 120 FPS mark and gets you very close to the 144. However, the 10600K is still over 120 FPS on the 1% lows. So high refresh gaming on both of these are going to be fine. The 5600 is just faster. How much faster, you ask? Well, let's see here. At stock, both of these aren't too much different. And like I said, it's easy math here. Going from 101 FPS to 108, it's plus 6.9%, 7%. So 7% difference there. And then the overclock system, this is where Ryzen does shine. It seems to gain more from the tuning and overclocking. As we can see here, that nets you 8.3% over the tuned and overclocked 10600K. Now, once again, you could get a little bit more out of this and shrink this number by a bit. However, you're not going to eliminate this entirely, even if you were running at 5.2 gigahertz. That would get you to maybe a tie if it's scaled linearly. Now, comparing the stock 10600K to the stock 12100, which actually beats the 5600, you're actually missing out on 11.9%, almost 12% performance loss there. So this is a $100 CPU versus a $160-ish CPU, and this is coming in 12% ahead. Now, when tuned and overclocked, things do flip a little bit as we can't overclock the 12100, only tune the RAM. So the 125 FPS on the 12100 when tuned is only 3.3% faster than the 121 on the 10600K. So these guys are basically tied, one tuned and overclocked. So I just wanted to highlight that because that's a very interesting point of information if you ask me. Now, the most relevant part about this is how much do these cost? And taking a look here, we can see the stock 10600K, which is just $20 cheaper than the overclocked one, because the only difference there is the RAM, comes in at $310, and that's just a couple bucks ahead of the $305 on the 5600, but it's significantly ahead of the $280 of an i3 12100. And then when you overclock it, you have $330. Once again, it's only $5 more than a 5600 system, but it's $30 or 10% higher than the 12100. So looking at these numbers, you can pretty much make up your mind on whether or not this makes sense for you. So there you go, guys. We got a few different takeaways from this. Number one, Zen 3 is faster than SKYLAKE. 4.8 gigahertz versus 4.7. So the 10600K did have a slight advantage. Now, I know a lot of people will be like, well, you can run it faster, and then you have the 10900K, which has a lot more L3 cache. Yes, you can make SKYLAKE or Comet Lake, whatever you want to call it. Technically, it can run faster than something like a Zen 3 5600, but it requires much more money in terms of cooling and a bunch of other things. When you're doing apples to apples, Intel's a little bit behind here. Now, if you already have a 6-core or even a 4-core 8-thread SKYLAKE CPU that's running fast enough and it does everything that you need, there's really no reason to upgrade to something like a Zen 3. It's just not that much faster. It's just that little extra bit. It's not a big deal. So you're not too far behind and you're still getting high refresh rate gaming, no problem. If you want a little extra performance, as you can see, tuning and overclocking your system can net you a nice little performance bump. And yeah, you can go ahead and take advantage of that It's about an extra 20%, which we're seeing on all the rest of the CPUs. And for me, that makes a lot more sense. Sell your RAM for 40 or 50 bucks, buy a $70 or $80 kit of RAM. 30, 40 bucks later, get yourself an extra 20%, do some overclocking, you'd be good to go. Once again, this was using a $10 cooler, or a $15 cooler rather. I have it linked down below. You can go ahead and check it out. Now, here's the flip side. If you're building a fresh system, is SKYLAKE worth it? The answer to that is no. Even though the motherboards are getting much, much cheaper, I got my Z490 for $80. That's actually very good. That's about how much I'm paying for B550 boards, but B550 has PCIe Gen 4. Z490, while it's overbuilt and has some really cool stuff, it's starting to get a little long in the tooth. Does not have PCIe Gen 4 unless you use Rocket Lake, and some of the boards will and some of them won't. It's kind of a headache. So yeah, I would definitely recommend going with a B450 and a 5600 over an old Comet Lake CPU, at least the 10600K. Now, if you get yourself a super deal, however, Ivan over from Frame Chaser said that Newegg was selling the 10850K with a Z590 motherboard for $300. That's going to be very competitive with anything else that we're seeing out here today in terms of price to performance. That's a great deal. So if you can find them at an absolute steal, yes, SKYLAKE and Comet Lake and all those lakes, they're still good. They're still going to perform very well. But honestly, you can see the fact that the 10600K is basically on par with the i3-12100. Alder Lake is a much, much bigger step forward and a giant leap over the SKYLAKE architecture. And you have to remember, that's at much higher clocks. The 10600K overclock is effectively running basically 20% faster than the i3-12100, and it's still basically on par. So there's a lot of extra performance there. And trust me, in the next video, next week, we're gonna take a look at the higher end Alder Lake chips, and it's next tier, guys. Like, the numbers I'm gonna show you guys are so absolutely insane that I had to go out and buy a 5800X 3D because I'm like, this is next level. There's actually a gap in the lineup. So basically the locked CPUs are one tier of CPU, and then the unlocked stuff is a whole nother generation. So if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. You do not want to miss next week's video. It's eye-opening to see how fast the Alder Lake CPUs are when you give them the clock speed that they need and want, and tune the memory, and basically just get the GPU out of the way. No GPU limitations. And there's a little asterisk to that, which I'll go over in next week's video. And yeah, it's absolutely insane. So I'm really enjoying these videos. If you do as well, once again, smash that like button. Please subscribe. Please share with friends. If you want to join the good old gamer community, you can do so by clicking the little join button down below, or the Patreon link in the video description. Gets you into the Discord. You also gain access to the Not an Apple Fan Discord. And we're like one big family, and we have fun and chat and talk about this stuff behind the scenes. And yeah, we try to put out all the most accurate information as possible. So if you want to help support, join the community, you can do so, and I really appreciate that. But yeah, other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will catch you guys in the next video.